Study Session 10. William Ockham. Introduction. In this study session, you will learn about how the influence of faith diminished and resulted in the decline of scholasticism in the 14th and 15th century. On the cultural level in particular, the people of those centuries distanced themselves from the dogmatism of faith and began to embrace reason, which proclaimed its autonomy both in the fields of science and philosophy. People no longer appreciated the efforts of figures like Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Scotus to harmonize Christianity and Greek philosophy. It was at this time, when scholasticism was losing its strength, that William Ockham flourished to save the admirable cooperation that once existed between faith and reason. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study session, you should be able to state what Ockham refers to as the supreme principle that influences human thinking. Describe what Occam's razor is all about. State Occam's conception of human knowledge about the world. State the kind of sign which Ockham says there are. Describe how Ockham sees the doctrine of the Trinity. The background of William Ockham. William of Ockham was born between 1280 and 1290 in the village of Ockham. He studied theology at Oxford, and his writing ranged within the scope of theology, philosophy, and physics. His life was a controversial one, especially with regards to being accused by the church as heretic in his theological teachings. He was one of the most influential philosophers of the 14th century. He was at Oxford and then at Paris, where he was first the pupil and afterwards the rival of Duns Scotus. He was involved in the quarrel of the Franciscan order with Pope John XXII on the subject of poverty. Philosophical thoughts of William Ockham. Omnipotence of God. The doctrine of the omnipotence of God was taken by William as the supreme principle that must inform all our thinking about the world. In his words, I believe in God, Father Almighty, which I understand thus, that everything which does not involve a manifest contradiction is to be attributed to the divine power. It was from this central conviction that he draws some very radical conclusions in the areas of epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. He argues that if God is all-powerful, then his creation of the world was not guided by any rational necessities. Everything in the world is contingent. Since this is the case, then only experience can tell us about the existence of things in the world and their properties. Occam's razor. Ockham is best known for a maxim which is not to be found in his works, but has acquired the name of Occam's razor. This maxim says, entities are not to be multiplied without necessity. Although he did not say this, he said something which has much the same effect, namely, it is vain to do with more what can be done with fewer. That is to say, if everything in some science can be interpreted without assuming this or that hypothetical entity, there is no ground for assuming it. I have myself found this a most fruitful principle in logical analysis. This principle of parsimony, whose frequent use of Occam gained in the name of Occam's razor, was employed as a methodological principle of economy in explanation. He invoked it most frequently under such forms as plurality is not to be assumed without necessity, and what can be done with fewer, that is assumptions, is done in vain with more. He seems not to have used the formulation, entities are not to be multiplied without necessities. Thus, the principal use made by Ockham of the principle of parsimony was in the elimination of pseudo-explanatory entities. According to a criterion, he expresses in the statement that nothing is to be assumed as necessary in accounting for any facts unless it is established by evident experience or evident reason or is required by the articles of faith. Occam's metaphysics and the problem of universals. Occam was a nominalist. The nominalists of the 15th century looked upon him as the founder of their school. He thought that Aristotle had been misinterpreted by the Scotists, followers of Duns Scotus, and that this misinterpretation was due partly to the influence of Augustine, partly to Avicenna, but partly to an earlier cause. Porphyry's treatise on Aristotle's categories. Occam reduced the metaphysical problem of universals to simply the question of whether we can use general terms and proper names in propositions to refer to individuals. He maintained a nominalist position. For him, some universals do not really exist. God cannot conceive of them either. God can have an idea of what he's going to create, but this is always an idea of a particular individual. He opined that if we say God created a human species, God did not have in mind the form of humanity. Instead, he had in mind the multitude of distinct individual people, all of whom somewhat resemble each other. Furthermore, understanding is of things, not of forms, produced by the mind. These are not what is understood, but that by which things are understood. Universals in logic are only terms or concepts, predicable of many other terms or concepts. Universal, genus, species are terms of second intention and therefore cannot mean things. But since one and being are convertible, if a universal existed, it would be one and an individual thing. A universal is merely a sign of many things. As to this, Occam agrees with Aquinas as against Averroes, Avicenna, and the Augustiners. Both hold that they are only individual things, individual minds and the acts of understanding. Both Aquinas and Occam, it is true, admit the universal ante rem, but only to explain creation. It had to be in the mind of God before he could create, but this belongs to theology, not to the explanation of human. Occam's nominalism separated faith and reason. He had raised critical questions about the status of universal terms. The central question as to whether such term as man referred to any reality other than particular men, James and John. Is there a substance in addition to these particular men, to which the universal term man refers? Take 2. To which the universal term man refers. To a keen logician such as Occam, these critical questions had far-reaching consequences. Most important of all was his conclusion that in using universal terms, the mind is not doing anything more than thinking in an orderly way about particular things. Only concrete individual things exist. Universal terms such as man refer equally to James and John, not because there is some real substance of manness in which both James and John share or participate, but only because nature that is James is like the nature that is John. Universal terms such as man are simply signs or names, hence nominalism for designating those concepts that particular things engender in human reason. Human reason, then, is limited to the world of individual things. Occam's view was genuinely empirical. The mind, he said, does not know anything more than individual things and their qualities, even though the mind is able to use universal terms. Such terms are nothing more than terms or names for classes of individual things. Above all, universal terms do not refer to a realm of reality above or beyond the world of concrete individual things. Occam's epistemology. In his theory of knowledge, Occam believes that all knowledge about the world can either be intuitive knowledge or abstractive knowledge. Intuitive knowledge. This is a type of knowledge that includes our perception of external things and our immediate awareness of our own inner states, such as acts of will, joy, and sorrow. Abstractive knowledge. This is a type of knowledge that is not related to an object of immediate experience is a derivative form of knowledge called abstractive knowledge. This knowledge is a pale residue left in the mind by original experiences. The object of these experiences are retained in the mind as concepts or mental signs. Abstractive knowledge includes the image or memory of a specific thing, minus the concrete details of its existence. They also include ideas that refer to an entire category of individuals, such as animals, tree, and book. Occam's theory of sign. A sign is something that stands for or represents something else. There are two kinds of sign: natural and conventional signs. Natural signs. These occur whenever an object signifies its cause or when a particular object creates an image, such as smoke as a sign of fire, or mental picture within us. E.g., when we see a red rose, it causes a red rose image to be retained in our mind. Conventional signs. These occur when each culture invents words to refer to those mental images which were retained in our mind as a result of natural signs. Occam on direct realist empirism. Following Aristotle, Occam asserts that human beings are born blank states. There are no innate certainties to be discovered in our minds. We learn by observing qualities in objects. Occam's version of empiricism is called direct realism, because he denies that there is any intermediary between the perceiver and the world. Direct realism states that if you see an apple, its redness causes you to know that it is red. Occam preempts idealism through the notion of intuitive cognition, which plays a crucial role in his four-step account of knowledge acquisition, and it can be summarized as follows. The first step is sensory cognition, receiving data through the five senses. This is an ability human beings share with animals. The second step, intuitive cognition, is uniquely human. Intuitive cognition is awareness that the particular individual perceived exists and has the qualities it has. The third step is recordative cognition, by which we remember past perceptions. The fourth step is abstractive cognition, by which we place individuals in groups of similar individuals. Notice that if an apple is set in front of a horse, the horse will receive data about the apple, the color, the smell, and etc., and react appropriately. The horse will not, however, register the reality of the object. While intuitive cognition is itself non-propositional, it provides the basis for formulating true propositions. A horse cannot say this apple is red because its mind is not complex enough to register the reality of what it perceives. The human mind, registering the existence of things, both that they are and how they are, can therefore formulate assertions about them. Occam's logic. According to Occam, the human mind, although born without any knowledge, comes fully equipped with a system for processing perceptions as they are required. Take two. As they are acquired. This system is thought, which Occam understands in terms of an unspoken mental language. He might compare thought to a machine ready to manipulate a vast quantity of empty boxes. As we observe the world, perceptions are placed in the empty boxes. Then the machine sorts and organizes the boxes according to content. Two small boxes with similar contents might be placed together in a big box, and then the big box might be conjoined to another big box. For example, as perceptions of Rover and Fido accumulate, they become the concept dog, and then the concept dog is associated with the concept fleas. This conceptual apparatus enables us to construct meaningful sentences such as all dogs have fleas. For Occam, only substances and qualities have real essence definitions, signifying things composed of matter and form. The other 8 categories signify a substance or a quality while connoting something else. They therefore have nominal essence definitions, meaning that they are not existing things. For instance, suppose you have one orange. It is a substance with a real essence of citrus fruits. Take two. It is a substance with a real essence of citrus fruits. Furthermore, it possesses several qualities, such as its color, its flavor, and its smell. The orange and its qualities are existing things according to Occam. Occam eliminates the rest of the categories along the same lines. Occam's theology. For William of Ockham, theology is not a science. As a staunch empiricist, he is committed to the thesis that all knowledge comes from experience, yet we have no experience of God. It follows inescapably that we have no knowledge of God. Furthermore, he sees the doctrine of the Trinity, according to which God is in three persons, is one, as a logical contradiction. The Trinity is the core Christian doctrine. Christians traditionally consider the Trinity a mystery, meaning that it is beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Ockham goes so far as to admit that it is a blatant contradiction. He displays the problem through the following syllogism. According to the doctrine of the Trinity, God is the Father and Jesus is God. Therefore, by transitivity, according to the doctrine of the Trinity, Jesus is the Father. Yet, according to the doctrine of the Trinity, Jesus is not the Father. So, according to the doctrine of the Trinity, Jesus both is and is not the Father. For Ockham, however, this syllogism establishes that theology is not logical and must never be mixed with philosophy. Ockham's proof of God's existence. Ockham rejects all of the alleged proofs of the existence of God, in particular, Anselm's ontological proof and Thomas Aquinas' cosmological proof. Ockham thinks that the most plausible version of each boils down to an infinite regress argument of the following form. If God does not exist, then there is an infinite regress. But infinite regresses are impossible. Therefore, God must exist. The reason Ockham finds this argument form to be the most plausible is that he fully agrees with the second premise that infinite regresses are impossible. If it were possible to show that God's non-existence implied an infinite regress, then Ockham would accept the inference to his existence. Ockham denies, however, that God's non-existence implies any such thing. Ockham thinks that infinite regresses are impossible only insofar as they imply extensive infinity. According to Ockham, advocates of the ontological proof reason as follows. There will be an infinite regress among entities if there were not one greatest entity. Therefore, there must be one greatest entity, namely God. He didn't encounter this reasoning by denying that greatness is an objectively existing quality. Rather, he takes the great chain of being for granted. The great chain of being is a doctrine prevalent throughout the Middle Ages and beyond. According to it, all of nature can be ranked on a hierarchy of value from top to bottom, roughly as follows: God, angels, humans, animals, plants, rocks. The great chain of being implies that greatness is an objectively existing quality. Ockham claims further that advocates of the cosmological argument reason as follows. There would be an infinite regress among causes if there were not a first cause. Therefore, there must be a first cause, namely God. There are two different ways to understand cause in this argument: efficient cause and conserving cause. An efficient cause brings about an effect successively over time. For example, your grandparents were the efficient cause of your parents, who were the efficient cause of you. A conserving cause, in contrast, is a simultaneous support for an effect. For example, the oxygen in the room is a conserving cause of the burning flame on the candle. In Ockham's view, the cosmological argument fails using either type of causality. Ockham's ethics. Ockham's ethics combines a number of themes. For one, it is a will-based ethics in which intentions count for everything and external behavior or actions count for nothing. In themselves, all actions are morally neutral. Nevertheless, despite the divine command themes in Ockham's ethics, it is also clear that he wanted morality to be to some extent a matter of reason. There is even a sense in which one can find a kind of natural law theory in Ockham's ethic. One way in which God conveys his divine command to us is by giving us the natures we have. Unlike Augustine, Occam accepted the possibility of the virtuous pagan. Moral virtue for Occam does not depend on having access to revelation. For Occam, acts of will are morally virtuous either extrinsically, that is, derivatively, through their conformity to some fundamental acts of will, or intrinsically. On pain of infinite regrets, therefore, intrinsically virtuous acts of will must ultimately lead back to an intrinsically virtuous act of will. That intrinsically virtuous act of will for Occam is an act of loving God above all else and for his own sake. In his early work on the connection of the virtues, Occam distinguishes 5 grades or stages of moral virtue, which have been the topic of considerable speculation in the secondary literature. 1. The first and lowest stage is found when someone wills to act in accordance with right reason, that is, because it is the right thing to do. 2. The second stage adds moral seriousness to the picture. The agent is willing to act in accordance with right reason, even in the face of contrary considerations, even if necessary at the cost of death. 3. The third stage adds a certain exclusivity to the motivation. One wills to act in this way only because right reason requires it. It is not enough to will to act in accordance with right reason, even heroically, if one does so on the basis of extraneous non-moral motives. 4. At the fourth stage of moral virtue, one wills to act in this way, precisely for the love of God. This stage alone is true and perfect moral virtue of which the saints speak. 5. The fifth and final stage can be built immediately on either the third or the fourth stage. Thus, one can have the fifth without the fourth stage. The fifth stage adds an element of extraordinary moral heroism that goes beyond even the seriousness of stage 2. Study session summary. In this study session, you have learned that in Occam's doctrine of the omnipotence of God, he sees God as the basis for all human thoughts and his metaphysics. 2. In his metaphysics, Occam reduced the metaphysical problem of universals to simply the question of whether we can use general terms and proper names in propositions to refer to individuals. 3. In his epistemology, he distinguished between intuitive knowledge and abstractive knowledge, and also gave his version of empiricism. 4. Occam contends that theology should not be mixed with philosophy, since the two pursue different concerns. And lastly, he rejects all alleged proofs of God's existence, in particular Anselm's ontological proof and Aquinas' cosmological proof. End of study session 10. Thank you for listening.